Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Carol DeFalco, and I'm so delighted to be here with you and with Jess. I'm going to let Jess introduce herself to you in just a moment. We have put together this Psych Scribe Studio writing workshop just for um, you psychology students out there who are really interested in your own growth of your writing skills. So maybe this would be a helpful recording for you when you are thinking about your next writing assignment, in the midst of a writing assignment, or in general as you look to grow your own writing skills. Um, Jess, I'd love for you to introduce yourself in this as we get started here.
Course. Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Jess Gallagher and I'm librarian at Quincy College. And thank you, Carol, for having me here and for
You're welcome.
being able to talk about writing, especially at the college level in the discipline of psychology.
It's so wonderful. So, folks, if you're watching this recording for the first time, Jess and I put this workshop together last summer, I believe, and we have run it now a couple of times live via Zoom. But if you haven't been able to join us in one of those sessions, due to scheduling conflicts and whatnot, we wanted you to be able to have this content as you grow your own academic writing as a student. So without further ado, let's get started.
Yeah. So what is academic writing? A lot of people, when they come into the library, they ask us this question just as a first place to start. But essentially, academic writing is a formal style of writing used in universities and scholarly publications that many of you guys are going to encounter in journal articles and books on academic topics. And you'll also be expected to write your essays and research papers in an academic style. So academic writing itself takes a critical approach, one that helps you present your ideas in a clear way and builds upon the work of others. This type of writing encourages you to use analysis to reach your own conclusions about how elements of a topic or theory might come together to create an argument that may not be evident at first glance. So, what are some ways you guys might be able to take a critical approach, right? To do this, it's important that we acknowledge the complexity of the subject matter that we work with, such as theories or various branches of psychology. And this means it's critical that we explain that the reasonings and evidence behind our arguments while anticipating the consequences or disagreements. So while we must take a position in our argument, we have to be critical to consider both sides of that argument to strengthen our own claim with credible evidence. And this could be using other scholarly sources that have been peer reviewed using the library databases, which if you ask one of the librarians on staff, we are more than happy to walk you through a one-on-one presentation of how to access those resources at the library.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Jess. And as you were speaking, I was thinking about sort of my three C's of writing. Writing should be clear, concise, and compelling. And I feel like you just really went into a beautiful depth of each of those elements as well. And academic tone, that's something that we talk about a lot, isn't it? How it does your piece of writing, are you expressing it in an academic tone? And that academic tone is everything that Jess just highlighted. Yeah, so super beautiful. We are also thinking about four distinct um, components of academic writing within psychology. There are sort of these four general buckets and categories. So when we're asked to write a paper, we want to be thinking about, is it a reaction paper, a reflection paper, a research paper, or an inquiry paper? And so if we want to dive a little bit more deeply into these elements, a reaction paper is where it doesn't necessarily need to be an involved paper, but a piece of writing that's a reaction is going to be just that, like our reaction to something, whether it's to another piece of writing, whether it's a reaction toward a discussion in class, toward a research study or a statistic that we are learning about. So it's our response to that. And usually reactions are pretty brief in their length, and again, very clear and very concise. A reflection paper, it really involves the use of the word I, right? We write reflection papers from our first narrative. That is not to say that all reflection papers are solely anecdotal. reflection papers oftentimes will have and should have really good empirical evidence to support our writing and our reflections, but they are driven from a place of how I personally am reflecting and taking account as to what's happening. And then a research paper could still use a first narrative I in psychology. And we are actually moving much more heavily towards a first person narrative. However, a research paper is going to have a clear thesis statement and a clear academic argument. It will be heavily noted with empirical support, right? And then an inquiry is our drive to investigate and ask our own further questions about any topic that we're writing about. So the common thread through all four of these types of writings is that they all will involve supported, peer-reviewed empirical evidence to support our claims that we're making. And to give weight to our discussion. But yet they do so in four very distinct ways. Jess, do you have a thought, anything that I maybe didn't cover as clearly in distinguishing these four that you can think of?
Yeah, no, I think you summed it up really well. And I think we should definitely highlight on the aspect of inquiries and asking very strong questions in order to help better shape
Mm,
our research for all of these categories. And I'm excited to talk about that in the next slide
yeah,
too.
excellent. Let's jump in.
Yeah, so shaping the question for a research paper. So a lot of students ask me when they come into the library, oh, I'm not sure how to craft a thesis statement or how to start crafting an argument for my paper. And this is across a lot of disciplines, right? Even just outside the realm of psychology. So shaping the research paper requires having a research question. And this is something that is necessary across all types of academic writing. So, like, what is a research question? A research question is a question at the center of your research that should be clear, which means it provides enough specifics so that your audience can understand its purpose without needing additional explanation. It has to be focused, so narrow enough to be answered thoroughly in the space of that the writing assignment allows. And this means either narrowing it, it could be geographically, population-wise, or thematically. Those are some common trends that students use a lot of times to
Mm,
help narrow down their research so it's not too broad. It also has to be concise, so it's expressed clearly and not too wordy, right? So limiting repetition or too many phrases that you might repeat over and over again, just so you can get to the main point of your topic itself. But it also has to be complex. So you can't simply answer your research question with a yes or no. It requires some sort of analysis of ideas and sources prior to composing the answer. So an example of something that wouldn't be a research question would be, is grass green, right? Very basic. You know, you could answer that with a yes. It has to be something a little more complex than that, that requires a lot more thought and makes it arguable. So if it's arguable, the potential answers that you might have for that research question can be up for debate or open to debate and not just accepted as fact, right? So it's something where you can argue from both sides. So as long as your research question aligns with something, I'd be like, well, yes, this theory could be applied to that, or like, oh no, I don't think this is the correct answer. Here's another additional theory we can use instead, right? So not just about merging together like the perfect amalgamation of a bunch of different words for your research question and not having an idea of how to answer it or what stance you want to take, but it's really about having a strong position in your research question and then using that to craft your thesis statement is really important.
yeah, that's beautifully succinct. I love that thinking. And so often we do fall into the trap of thinking about yes or no, these binary answered questions. And the closed-ended question allows us to, kind of get quite frustrated in the research process because we quickly realize, oh, I'm trying to answer something that is a closed question rather than an open question. So oftentimes, maybe the words how or in what ways, right, may be a part of our research questions. It's really cool. Um, There is a link to a another PowerPoint that we don't need to necessarily go into in depth here, but something that we often think about in our psychological writing pieces is the difference between fact, opinion, and bias. So it's worth us just noting here how we differentiate the three elements. Facts are things that can be verifiable. I don't want us to confuse the word fact with the word truth, right? Sometimes we conflate the two, but a fact is something that we can verify. You know, how many inches is my teacup here is a fact. We can measure it, and then we understand that that is indeed the number. And it's verifiable because we can measure it with many times or with multiple devices. It's also going to be a more objective and much less much more impartial than other anecdotally, evident pieces. A bias, on the other hand, is something that we all have, right? We talk about that a lot. We all hold bias. In writing in psychology, we want to understand what our biases are. It's our position of how we see the world, right? And the more that we can identify with clarity how we understand our own biases, the more we can own them in our writing, right? And we can phrase that, such as, well, from my perspective or in my experience. These phrases give us clues as to how one does see the world. An opinion, on the other hand, is not a negative thing. We don't want to shy away from opinion, but we want our opinions to be well informed. As I wrote here, they're expressing a personal beliefs or judgments, right? They're very highly subjective, and that's not a bad thing. But again, if we have an opinion, we want to convey that to our reader or one another in discussion by saying, well, based on this evidence over here, my opinion is we should move in direction A, B, or C. So opinions are, we want to acknowledge, are not necessarily supported by facts, but whether we are using empirical evidence to build a foundation for our opinion, or whether we're using lived experience to build a foundation for our opinion, we want to make sure that we're conveying that information very clearly. So when we're speaking, whether in dialogue or through writing, I encourage us all to use language that signals to our readers and our discussion partners whether we're speaking from a place of fact, bias, or opinion. Anything to add there, Jess?
Right, yeah, and I think especially on the idea of opinion itself, opinion and subjectivity is going to be especially strong if you're writing a reflective piece. So
Mm,
anything in the
good
realm of
note.
reflection, or if you are writing a research study, there's always the option of doing like an autoethnography, right? So talking about a particular theory, but also tying in your own
Mhm.
lived experience, which kind of balances both academic language and academic strategies, and also that personal self like reflexive approach. So there's a bunch of different ways you can kind of like mix and match when it comes to opinion and subjectivity in your research. So I think those are all amazing things that students should
Yeah.
consider too.
They really are. And you mentioned the word reflexivity. So research or reflexivity is something that students you may come across when you're doing your research for a paper that you're writing. And that is an area in a research journal article that will say, it's often titled research or reflexivity. And it is exactly what Jess just mentioned. It is the researcher letting us know how they see the world, right? What led them to ask the questions that they asked? What biases do they hold? And that's a really wonderful way of gaining transparency, not only through writing, but also through research.
All right. And then
Where are we going to begin, Jess?
I know, right? This is kind of like the scariest part of the entire like writing process is really developing your pre-writing strategies. And you might ask, like, what is a pre-writing strategy? So these are strategies that allow you to generate and clarify your ideas before you begin writing. And I'm going to talk about 5 writing strategies that I've used and I've also had students use who say these are their favorite and you can mix and match them. Some of them overlap a little bit. But yeah, these are just general techniques to help you generate ideas, refine your topics, and get your writing process started smoothly. So the first technique is called listening, and listening is a quick way to produce a lot of ideas by jotting down broad topics and narrowing them down with bullet points. So in order to do this, you might want to start by writing down all the possible terms related to your broad topic. Don't edit any of them, just write. These could be anything like keywords keywords or just larger concepts that you want to talk about. And then you're going to want to group these words together after you finish writing into similar items thematically. You can label each of these groups on a piece of paper to focus your topic even further. And then from there, you can begin to create a topic sentence or a thesis statement from your labels, or even just start generating your ideas for your research question, right? So, for example, topics like online discussion, gentrification, and data privacy can be narrowed down even further from a broad discussion about societal issues, right? And then you can use those concepts to kind of start thinking about where you want to go with your paper. Um, Clustering is a really popular one. Students and I often refer to it as mind mapping. We actually have a wonderful mind mapping book on the psychology display in the library, which is there presently. But if you want to use that book after the display is down, you can come talk to one of the librarians and we'd be happy to check it out for you guys. But mind mapping or clustering helps you visually explore the relationships between ideas. So this works really well for people who learn best visually rather than just writing itself. So if that's something that you're really into, then this is a great strategy. You're basically just going to write your main subject in the center of the page. You can write it within a circle and then surround it with related ideas and linking them with lines to show the connections. And you're going to continue to branch out from each additional topic, kind of creating even more and more circles and lines on the page itself. And it helps you clarify how your ideas might fit together and guiding the direction of your writing, right? So if you start with sustainability at the center of your mind map, then you can connect ideas like renewable energy, conservation in order to continue developing on that topic itself. Another method that I really like is called free writing, which is a technique where you write nonstop about a topic for a set amount of time, and you don't have to go for so long. 5 to 10 minutes is more than enough. And to do this, you might want to begin by writing without worrying about grammar or coherence at all. You literally just have a blank page and you start writing. If you're stuck, you write whatever comes to mind, even if it is repetitive. This isn't the part where we want to self-edit ourselves. It's where we kind of want to see where our ideas come just from an unfiltered lens. And then after the time's up, you can review what you've written and highlight any key ideas. And you can also mix free writing with one of the other strategies like clustering. So after you highlight through your free writing, you can go in and create a mind map to make that visual connection between all your ideas. Um, and that's one of the best ways I like to use a lot of strategies is having them overlap and interconnect. Or you could go in to do some looping, which connects directly into the free writing strategy, which allows you to focus more deeply on key ideas. So after your first free write, you can identify a compelling idea and then start a new free writing session based on that key idea, right? See what else comes out of that process, and you can repeat it several times, each time honing in narrow and more narrow into that particular topic. And a
Mhm.
lot of students that really excel at this are the ones who feel like they have so much that they can say about a particular topic, but don't know where to go. Like they can just off the top of their head kind of like go at it. This is a great way to help you narrow down exactly what you want to talk about. And then something I like to do when I have no idea of what I really want to write on is asking myself journalist questions. And to do this, we ask ourselves 6 classic questions for how to like start talking about our idea, which is who, what, where, when, why, and how. Right? So you can apply the questions to your topic to explore it thoroughly and tailor the questions to your subject, focusing on relevant aspects. So this method usually quickly generates detailed information about your topic. So if we're talking about environmental issues, you might want to ask who's infected by environmental issues? How can we resolve this, right? Asking those general questions to narrow down different theories of how you might answer the question itself and ensuring that they're still arguable and kind of gaining your own idea of what your stance is as a writer and researcher. But these are only a handful of strategies that are super helpful. I know there's a bunch of others that students like to use. Carol, I don't know if you have any favorite ones that you
Yeah,
use.
I definitely am a fan of the free writing and the mind mapping. I often call a mind map a concept map. So students who have taken a class with me before likely have had an assignment that is called a concept map. And it is exactly how you described I can't underscore enough how much I love a really good concept map because it's a transferable skill. This is something that you can use to help you even study for a test in a completely different subject. Um, one other analogy that I would paint the picture of, I think here, just as a concept map, would be a tree. So if your main concept is the tree trunk, for example, so the main thing that I want to talk about would be adolescence, right? Like this is the core of my essay here. And now those big branches, those first branching off really thick branches, the ones that are great for like climbing trees and swings and so forth, those are going to be the other main ideas. Those will transfer over to become the subheadings within my paper. So one might be, mental health challenges commonly faced by adolescents. The second branch might be developmentally appropriate interventions. And then the third branch might be uh, let's see, like maybe uh, relationships and social support systems, working to help adolescents who are experiencing mental health difficulties. You can appreciate that each of those three big branches are going to have a lot of like smaller branches. And then my very thing I love the most here are those little tiny twigs that have all the little details, right? And the experiences. That's where we really see a lot of intersection. So thinking of those big branches as the subheadings of your paper can really help with some organization. And we're going to get to that in just a moment, but just sort of to paint that picture for you a little bit. There's a link here on this slide to effective strategies so that you can kind of go back and play around with them. When I mentioned to you that there's a link on the slide, that's because this PowerPoint will also be housed in the psychology page of the library, which is a new resource page that our wonderful librarians have created for us. So we'll be able to house recordings such as these there. So you'll be able to find all of these resources at your fingertips. Jess, just before we move on to the foundation component, I'll share with you all that recently in a class, we had a moment, we just had a writing assignment coming up, and everybody just had 5 minutes of just free writing, right? To just get themselves sort of in the zone. And then in addition to that, we did another 5 minutes of using that free writing exercise to just create a rough outline. Within 10 minutes, students walked out of class super prepared then to put that outline into paper form, right? And it was really, I mean, I was really blown away and pretty impressed at in such a few short minutes how much could really be accomplished. So these exercises are really, really effective, folks. I encourage you to try them.
Yeah, exactly. And they're just all key concepts into just building the foundation of your writing, which,
Yeah.
like we already talked about, concept maps work really well, free writing works really well. Some students like to develop an outline, or sometimes even just understanding how you learn best might help you narrow down what strategy you want to use. So, knowing what your learning style is, whether it's visual, auditory, or kinesthetic, can enhance your study and writing habits. And one way to identify it is to reflect on how you absorb information best. So, do you prefer diagrams, listening to lectures, or hands-on activities? So, especially like in the field of psychology and with the strategies you've mentioned, we're kind of tackling a bunch of different strategies at once.
Mm.
But if you don't know where to start or which one might work best for you, knowing how you learn best would also really help you. So if you tailor your strategies to your learning style, it can improve your comprehension and retention, making your overall writing process a lot smoother. But one like really clear thing I want to highlight is using time management to reach your goals. I think it's something I see a lot of students who come into the library struggle with. Effective time management is crucial for staying on track and meeting deadlines. And I'm just gonna go over like few quick strategies for just helping you manage
Perfect.
time management, which it could be breaking your writing process up into manageable tasks with specific deadlines before your larger deadline. So, for example, if you say to yourself, I want to have my research question done at least 2 weeks before the final deadline. And then you set yourself on that deadline and then you gradually increase. So you might go, oh, I'm going to develop my thesis at this set time before my deadline. Then I'll work on my introduction, and then I'll do this topic a little more. And then you'll give yourself more time to edit, all until it's up to the due date, and then you're able to submit. Or using tools like planners or apps to schedule study sessions and writing time has also been really helpful for a lot of students. I know a lot of students like to use the Pomodoro timer, and that's also something for free that you can just look up on the internet. And using that study strategy often helps students kind of break up their study time, but also give themselves a little break so it's more manageable. And it's also like a game a little bit. So it's another way to kind of like not trick your brain, but help your brain kind of work towards those goals that you have. And just finding the right strategy that works for you is key to just building this strong foundation for writing. Not just for psychology papers, but this is something that you can apply across all your classes, something that Carol already mentioned in our
Yeah.
last slide.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really want to underscore the time management segment. You just shared some fantastic strategies. Um, I often refer to that as academic time. So I know sometimes I'm a little bit of a broken record here about, time blocking, but it works really well for me. And I know that it doesn't work well for everyone. But here's, if you haven't given it a try, I would definitely recommend it. Think about, I have academic time that I need to devote to classes outside of when I'm in class. So my recommendation is look at your calendar and actually block it off on your calendar. Think about where also you work best. So oftentimes students will say, and I bet you hear this a lot too, Jess, like, the library is such a wonderful, welcoming place to do work. And students will say, I just work better when I'm at school instead of when I'm going home. And I completely jive with that. Even though I am at home right now in my home office, I actually hardly work in this space, right? I usually do a lot of my work outside of this area because when I'm here, I want to tidy it up. I don't necessarily, it distracts me from my point of writing. So I find it much easier to write at a coffee shop or to write at a library, to write at Quincy, and use the Quincy College Library as well. So think about in your calendar where you work best and then block it right into your calendar with your goals for what you want to accomplish with your piece of writing.
Right,
It's
yeah.
amazing how fast it'll go. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And I know one strategy that I really like to do, especially as like someone who's been a grad student before, is
Mhm.
using digital tools to help me. So I love using Notion and their free platform and templates that they use to design your own academic planner, which gives you
Ooh.
notifications of like times you could block out for writing. It lets you move scheduling, and it also connects to something called like a Notion calendar, which gives you notifications on your desktop that actually pop up and are like, oh, it's time to do writing and things like that. So having those fun visuals and just a customizable template where I could store class information, but also like writing prompts or like little notes that I can upload has been a huge help, especially with like creating checklists, things like that. So definitely if you guys want more tips on time management tools or
Mhm.
digital journals like Notion, come into the library, ask to speak with one of the librarians because this is something we're also really aware of and can help you guys out with.
It's perfect. There's a lot of really good resources. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's fantastic. And it's fun to sometimes gamify, right? Gamify your goals. When we're thinking about the structure, Jess, you're going to speak more deeply to APA guidelines and so forth, which I really appreciate. I'm going to just highlight here that we've covered a lot of these grounds already, the researching practices and so forth. And we'll look at that with the APA guidelines. I'm going to give a shout out though. The Quincy College Library purchases um, a subscription to the APA. The APA databases. So when I'm saying APA, we're talking about the American Psychological Association. They're a large professional organization. And one of the things that they are most notable for college students is APA formatting of papers and writing, but it certainly is probably a fraction of 1% of the entirety of what the APA actually is doing for the body of psychology as a whole. But um, going back to the Quincy College Library, so our library purchases a subscription to the APA databases. That means that when you're searching for a peer-reviewed journal article, or sometimes they're referenced as scholarly articles, when you're looking for that, your best bet is to look right within the Quincy College Library databases. And so by doing so, you will have access to the full article in PDF form. That actually also includes APA books. So you'll see in the databases for the library, it's APA Psych Info and APA books. Both include PDFs that are already paid for through this subscription for you to use. And I really want to encourage students to go there. What I would discourage you to do is go to Google and type in, research even through Google Scholar, because you're likely to run into a paywall issue. So you might find a really great article, but it will bring you to a paywall. So to avoid this dynamic from happening, first search in the library database under APA Psych Info. You'll then find great resources that you can use free of charge. If by chance you don't, and you do find an article that you'd really love to use, and you run into a paywall, Jess, I think you're probably just going to echo what I'm saying here, right? Which is send it to Jess or Sarah or Jeffrey, one of the librarians, bring it in and say, I'm really looking for this article. Can you help me find it? Through the library share process, they are likely to be able to find that article for you. So please don't pay for articles that you find for your research papers.
Absolutely. Cannot echo that any more than you have. If you have an article that you need just open access to, please come talk to us because as librarians, we do have the tools through the Mass Library Network of being able to go through like interlibrary loan services, commonly known as ILLs, to get you those articles from the network that we're connected to, right? So please never pay for an article that you see online.
Perfect, perfect. I realize our like images here. I might just need to like slide us over this. Oh, great, perfect. Um, this is a very simplistic outline of an APA designed paper. But one of the reasons that I think it's worth us looking at and just spending a couple of moments talking about is the way that it's broken up. Do you remember that concept map, the mind mapping and clustering that Jess was walking us through? Here's how that can look on paper, right? So we have our topic, we have our thesis statement, and now we need to break it up in where are those big branches. Of course, oops, sorry about that. Of course, we're going to have our introduction, right? Oh, sorry, my finger that got a little trigger happy there. First, we're going to have our introduction. Our introduction is going to essentially say the formula, right, for our introduction is going to say, what am I talking about, right? What are you going to be reading here? Why is this important? And it, in a sense, giving the reader the roadmap. If you think about like a brochure to a theme park, this outline should really highlight here's the path that you're going to go down to see the best rides, right? The roadmap that we're referring to here are your themes. So, theme one, theme two, theme three, for example, those should be noted in the closing of your introductory paragraph. So, recapping that, what am I writing about? I'm writing about mental health challenges in adolescence, right? Why am I writing about that? I'm writing about that because it's been on the rise since 2011, right? And we have documented really good data from NIH to understand that. And here are the three things that we're going to be talking about. We're going to look at what the main challenges are that adolescents are experiencing that are compromising their mental health. We're going to look at interventions that are available to them, and then lastly, we're going to look at family and support, and peer relationships and the impacts that they are playing in the role of adolescents in their mental health. So within that introduction, we've already covered a lot of ground, right? We've given that overview. Then here are those three branches. Obviously, in your paper, you're not going to write theme one, you're going to write whatever that theme is. But note that these are centered and they become bold typed, right? They are the headings of the topics. And this allows you to do one of the things that I found to be the most freeing process in writing, and take it for what it's worth because it's coming from a person myself who resisted outlines for years and years and years and years, insisting that I could just start at the beginning and keep going through. But once I really allowed myself to see the beautifulness of the outline differently, it set me free. And it's this essentially what happened. When you have identified themes that you're working with, you can now begin writing anywhere. And I have found that a rhythm to my writing is that I always start with the themes, like theme one, theme two, theme three, whatnot. Rarely do I ever write an introduction or a conclusion first. I typically write them last. And so I invite you to allow yourself to kind of be open to a new experience of the beautiful usefulness of the outline and see where your writing takes you from that point forward. One closing thought that I also wanted to make note of with that outline, as you're finding your research for your topics and for your themes for your paper, when you have an outline on your page, on your desktop, you can start copying and cutting different resources and references, and maybe the occasional quotation, although those aren't used very much in psychological writing. But you can start copying and pasting them into the theme that aligns with that reference. Then you can go back, almost like a bullet pointedness. Then you can go back and start formulating more cohesive paragraphs and thoughts and flow to your writing. Um, Jeff, what do you have, like, thoughts that I didn't include that you would recommend we consider? I definitely left out getting to the so what, so you might help us, bring that home.
Yeah, so when Carol mentions asking the question of like, so what, kind of talking about how important your research is in the larger context of the general field itself. So, what's something new or a new perspective that you're taking on in your research paper that you haven't seen within the other wider literature in the field? So, you can often identify this as a gap that a scholar has talked about in their own research that you kind of see, theorizing new things about that research itself, and really using your key body of your research to talk about that gap itself and stating the importance it is to the field, right? So I think those are kind of like the big questions we want to ask ourselves as we're writing or drafting or even creating an outline that a lot of students sometimes might not do on the onset. They might just go on by doing a literature review or talking about a synopsis of a lot of different research without getting to the meat of that so what question, which is huge when it comes to academic writing in the field.
Like, what are you going to do with this, right? What are we talking about? Why are we talking about it? And then so what can we do with this? Do I have a new idea, or am I building on something already there? That's fantastic. I love it. The outline for the win.
Oh yeah.
Jess, would you mind just walking us through what some strategies for when we are feeling pretty stuck?
Yes, I would love to, except feeling stuck is not amazing. It's like one of
It is
the worst feelings
not.
as a writer. But it's something that everybody struggles with. I've even struggled with it in the past. So a lot of times this is called writing anxiety. It's the feeling of stress, panic, or fear that you might experience before you start a writing task. Some people might also categorize this as writer's block, which I feel like all of us have experienced in the past. It's a common challenge for students, especially in demanding subjects like psychology, but there's several strategies that we can use to help combat this feeling of anxiety or just overcome writer's block itself. And one of the effective methods is to reframe your research process, right? So first, it's important to know your strength as a writer. So if you recognize your own strengths, this can significantly boost your confidence. If you reflect on past writing successes, identify the skills you use, what you liked, what you didn't like, whether it's your ability to conduct thorough research, organize your thoughts clearly, or construct compelling arguments. Focusing on what you excel at, you can approach your writing with a more positive mindset, and it helps you get started, right? Taking that first step into the writing process. Next, you can always clarify your goals, which is super essential. A clear goal helps you focus your writing efforts and directs your research. Something you might want to ask yourself is what you aim to achieve with your paper. Are you trying to inform, persuade, or analyze a certain topic? Having a well-defined goal in general will help guide you through the process and reduce any feelings of uncertainty you might have about the topic. And you might also want to consider setting realistic metrics for your success, right? By breaking your writing project into smaller, really manageable tasks, like completing a section or researching a specific word count each day, like through your writing process, you can prevent feelings of feeling overwhelmed, and celebrate the small wins that motivate you to keep going in the process itself. And then lastly, reframing your research may also help you see your work with a fresh perspective and inspire you to get back into writing. One way to do this is something that Carol already mentioned, which is to not start with the introduction. Beginning with the introduction can feel super daunting, and it sets the stage for your entire paper. So instead, try to start with the section where you feel the most comfortable, such as the body paragraph or your research findings or on a specific theme that you're really excited to talk about. The approach here allows you to build momentum and confidence before tackling the introduction, which can be, of course, very daunting. You might also find reverse outlining really helpful. This technique involves creating an outline from a draft rather than before writing. So after you complete your first draft, identify the main points in each paragraph and outline them. This could help clarify your argument and structure and make it easier for you guys to make adjustments where needed, or even to help you draft up your introduction too. Um, and of course, always seeking peer feedback and editing is something huge. So, working with the people around you, like your friends or fellow students, sharing your work with classmates or study groups can help you provide a fresh perspective and significantly reduce your anxiety by just, having somebody to talk about it with and also having another set of eyes to go through that paper. Constructive criticism not only improves your writing, but also reassures you that you're on the right track. And last but not least, one of my favorite things to do is to read my work out loud. This technique allows you to hear the flow of your writing and catch any errors or awkward phrasings that you might have throughout your paper. So make sure you dedicate or set aside some time to read your paper or your draft out loud, either to yourself or a friend. And this can also help you enhance the comprehension and clarity of the piece and make you feel overall more confident before you hand in your final draft.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as good psychology students, we know that perception rules the day, and our eyes do play tricks on us. So if we're just rereading our writing, we're inserting the, dotted I's and crossed T's, as it were. But when we read it out loud, we start to hear where we missed a comma, right? Where we had a run-on sentence and we really needed to make it 2 sentences. We can hear those things much more easily. So I was definitely a reluctant person to reading my writing out loud for editing, but boy, does it really work. That's probably the best tool around. And I wanted to add one more thing. When you're stuck, going back to that free writing exercise that Jess mentioned earlier, can be a lifesaver. So allowing yourself just to sort of put the books and so forth to the side and just set a timer for 90 seconds and just see what comes up.
Yeah.
So let's think a little bit about sourcing. We're included is this really useful YouTube video. Jess, do you feel as though, what's your feeling? Would you like to note the video, or do you think we should give it a play?
So I think once students probably have the out like this, wow, I can't think, slideshow itself,
Yeah,
they can click on it and investigate it for themselves. But I can briefly talk about maybe some of like the key components of APA. Um,
yeah.
and I also just want to highlight for you guys that the library has an APA citation guide for you guys to use too. So if it doesn't work for me verbally explaining some of like the key components of APA, please go check out that library guide. It's updated to APA 7, and the link is inserted inside the PowerPoint.
Perfect. And it's in every Canvas course.
Yes, exactly. So that's super cool that you guys can check that out. A lot of students, when they come into the library, want to start with figuring out how to even begin citing an APA, right? And the first thing that I like to do is just give them a brief outline of some of the key components of APA. So one thing I like to talk about is the general fit of the paper, so how it looks visually, right? That's important when it comes to APA. So making sure that you double space everything, use 12 point Times New Roman font, set 1 inch margins all around your paper, and number all your pages in the top right corner are really critical when you just start out by like having a blank page and set those settings right in front on the onset is super important. And then some of the essentials that you guys are going to want to include in your paper itself, if you're following APA format, is a title page. Your paper's face is often keyed in the title page itself, so it's going to include the title, your name, school, the course, and then the instructor and the date, all center format on that first page. And another component is the abstract. So around 150 to 250 words, it kind of outlines what you're going to discuss in the paper, just giving the reader a brief overview about everything you're going to discuss, right? And then you go into your main body, which often starts with an introduction, but you don't often need an introduction like title as that introduction. A lot of students ask me that question. And then the end of your paper, after you go through all the body paragraphs, is going to be your references, which is a list of your sources alphabetically on the new page. And you're going to want to use, like it's also displayed on the screen right now, a hanging indent when you do that citation. And we have a ton of videos helping you guys out on how to craft that reference list because a lot of students struggle with this. So please check out the video and the citation guide. And then a quick overview about citations is for in-text citations, it's going to be in parentheses. You're going to do author, comma, year. Super simple when you want to quote something, and make sure when you're using direct quotes that everything is included within quotations. And use the active voice when you can, especially in APA. Be sure to keep it clear and concise, and use the past tense for previous research, present tense for your results, things of that nature. And again, APA style, it takes a little while to learn, but once you actually get the swing of things, you're pretty much set to go, right? You're
Yeah.
ready to apply it to all the papers that you write in the future.
That's great. That's a really helpful synopsis. The two additions that I would add to that synopsis that you just said, one, unless you are writing an incredibly lengthy paper or it's being asked of you, an abstract for an undergraduate paper is really an unusual
Yeah.
ask. So you probably won't need to write an abstract unless you are being asked to do so. The second thing is that the main difference, I think many students, we spent a lot of time in our high school years writing in MLA. So it feels like a heavy lift switching to this other format. But really, the essence of APA is to use your own voice with the support of established research behind you. In contrast, MLA is often appropriately for citing literature. And in that sense, you really want to capture those direct quotes, right? Because that's where the power is. In APA, it's very unusual to, not very unusual, but it's really uncommon to use quotations as your citations because we want to hear your voice and we want to hear how you interpret the research that you're reading and the findings that you're reading. So your voice gets centered in the narrative and you're indicating appropriately, as Jess mentioned, with that paraphrasing in-text citation who also who built that foundation that supports your interpretation. So I hope that that clarifies why we have these distinct modalities of formatting. One really centers direct quotation and analysis of established literature. The other is an evolving voice, yours at the lead when you're the author, about interpreting psychological research and findings. So that's sort of at the heart of it. So when we say, yes, you should definitely use two references in your paper, the expectation is that you are also demonstrating that you're using those two references by citing them throughout your paper. So it would be a bit abnormal, right, to have your own narrative without any in-text citations and then list your references at the bottom. So the two need to match. And as just mentioned, there are so many amazing resources built into the library's website, built into both physical libraries at Plymouth and Quincy, and in every Canvas class, walking you through this. This is a great video that I highly recommend you take a look at if you are an auditory learner and want to just walk through it. But that's really great knowledge there, Jess. Thank you so much. Yeah, APA always is the tricky part. I think I just want to make a note here as we're talking about resources in our closing slide. How to set yourself up as a student for success in your writing. One tip that I have is to, if you typically write on a desktop computer or a laptop computer, um, think about, or even if you were to doing this like on Google Slides or Microsoft Word account, set aside a folder. So put a folder on your desktop or put a folder, in your Google Slides where you can store resources for writing. And within those resources, think about gifts that you can give your future self. Students who have taken my class before will likely recall every once in a while I put an announcement with like the gift of a title page, right? A formatted title page in APA. That is something that you can put in your folder, and then the next time you need to write a paper, you can pull it out, copy it onto a new document, format it, change the title and the professor's name, and you're good to go. So there are some really nice life hacks that will make your life easier as you continue to advance in your writing. But having a place that that here's where I keep my APA resource guide, or here's where I keep my writing resources, or the tricks of the trade that Jess has taught us today. That's where my go-tos are. Helps us not feel as though we have to reinvent the wheel every time we have to write a new paper. Thoughts about that, Jess, and thoughts of closing resources from your perspective?
Yeah, I 100% recommend downloading a folder to your desktop to store items. I also highly recommend creating a folder on your browser for any digital
Mm.
resources that you might want to
Yes.
write your papers. So in that digital browser folder, you can add the Quincy College Library guides, right? Which ones are your favorite? The APA guides. You can add any of the books that we might have, so like the Little Seagull, or you could add any of the tools for organizing that we've also listed in this slide here. Kumu is a virtual mind map. If you don't like using pen and paper, you can do it digitally, and I've used it a bunch of times. It's great. Zotero can help you organize your research, like a fully accessible database. And Wakelet is another platform that you can use to start organizing ideas in a template that actually takes the digital resource and allows you to organize it in a way where you can stack it. So these are all tools that I like to use
Mm.
myself for organizing, and you can even highlight Scrivener or any of the other resources in that digital folder for you. And
That's
talk
a great idea.
about organizing stuff. So just food for
Yeah. That's a really great idea. Yeah, so it's sort of like the in the moment, that old adage of only touch a paper once, like a touch a piece of paper once. In other words, don't let it accumulate on your desk, like do something with it. I think that we are now entering the age of digital organization being the same thing, right? When you come across a great resource, have a place where it goes digitally in an organizational way on your desktop, or um, a digital file folder, like a save reader list, even. So these are really great tools. I feel like we could do workshops on every single one of these tools. Do you know what I mean? But we're probably at the end of our time now. I think in summary, I would just say it's really generous of you, Jess, to like lend your expertise and your and just your wonderful demeanor and presentation style for our students. I really appreciate that. I know we all do. Do you have a closing thought for students before we say goodbye?
I think so. Yeah, I know I've said it a million times, but please come visit us in the library. Me, Sarah, and Jeffrey are always happy to just sit down with you guys, work one-on-one, and help you guys get started and access these resources. It's what we're here to do in the library, and if we don't have something, we're always able to direct you to the right resource that you might need, like the tutoring center, and just to set up digital tutoring too. We're always happy to help out. Okay, guys?
That's so perfect. That's so perfect. And key things that I'm taking away from our conversation today are one, allow yourself time, right? Give yourself the dedicated time for thinking, for organization, for writing, and also key elements, free writing, concept map, mind mapping are great strategies to help us organize our thinking, seek out library services to help us with our research. And essentially, when we want to really practice our skills of writing clearly, concisely, and with a compelling academic tone, we really just have to keep writing. We can't stop and wait for the next time around to roll around. So by doing it more often, by doing it on a consistent basis, we're strengthening our skills each time, which really helps us build our confidence. So let's keep doing that. Let's keep going in our writing. And Jess, thank you so much.
Thank
Um,
you.
Absolutely. This has been a joy. Jess is so fun to work with, folks. And for students out there, remember that you have a wealth of support services around you, thought partnering. And so if you want to deep dive into any of these strategies that we are talking about today, and since I've mastered the outline, it only took me decades, but since I really embraced the outline, I would love, love, love to thought partner with somebody out there about creating a great outline. So do reach out to any of us for your support as you're strengthening your own writing. And we'll say bye for now.
Bye, guys.